We're really pleased to have three Canada's leaders in the clean tech industry. I know that our time is tight, so I'll quickly introduce them, let them give us a few minutes of their company profile, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. Just so you know who they are, we have Zoltan Tompa from SDTC, we have Rod Lever from Export Development Canada, and Jon Dogterom from Mars in Toronto. Now, going back to Zoltan, Zoltan is the Director of Partnerships at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. As the Director for SCT's Tech Fund, Zoltan is responsible for identifying and forging strategic relationships with industry partners and investors. Zoltan leads SDTC's regional offices and works closely with SDTC's portfolio companies, helping them to connect to later stage sources of capital and corporate strategic partners. Zoltan, maybe I can turn it over to you and you can tell us a little bit more about SDTC.
Sure, thank you, Kapil. I appreciate the introduction. I think this is the fourth time that I've been up speaking, so hopefully there's a few new folks here and it's not too much of a repeat. But SDTC stands for Sustainable Development Technology Canada. We're a federally backed clean technology fund that was founded about 11 years ago as a policy instrument for the federal government. At the time, the federal government had set aside $100 million initially for SDTC to create a fund to invest in early stage technology companies, companies that had developed disruptive, very promising IP that could be exploited commercially and globally, that would deliver both significant environmental benefits and economic benefits. Since that time, the fund has been recapitalized all exclusively through the federal government, and now we have about $1.4 billion or so that has been allocated to SDTC. We were set up initially to administer our first fund, which is called the SDTech Fund, Sustainable Development Technology Fund, essentially a clean technology fund. And that's now a $590 million fund, which is fully allocated, and we just recently received an additional commitment of $325 million from the federal government, and that's inclusive in that $1.4 billion that I had indicated before. The model of the fund is we very proactively go out to the industry, to universities, to upstream funders and other sources of kind of places where you find pools of IP, and we try to source kind of best-in-class technologies to invest in. The model of the fund is that it is a grant-based mechanism up until now. That may change with that new 325 that we received, but up until now, we essentially place, we call them non-dilutive investments, but they're essentially grants into early stage promising technology companies. But we can only deploy that capital when there's other strategic partners that can come in alongside SDTC, either customers or channel partners to market, so that they become not only sharing the risk and share the potential commercial upside in the commercialization of the technology, but they're also vetting that there is a real market need for this technology. And they can also really help inform the technology development and demonstration process so that the technology is actually being developed in accordance with real market needs. And often they're bringing a much deeper understanding of the end-use market, and that's incredibly important for an early-stage technology company to have in mind as they try to form their work through the development and demonstration phases. As Kapil had mentioned, I also worked very closely with downstream investment. So as our portfolio has grown and as it's matured, recognizing that we're beyond a decade into this, the life cycle of the fund, we've now made approved 245 investments. Many of them are starting to reach that stage where they've either entered the market and done incredibly well, or we also have a tidal wave of companies that are just starting to reach the market, need expansion stage capital, and to work with corporate strategic partners. And I worked very closely with our portfolio companies as an interface between what the solution set in our portfolio is and what downstream investors and corporates need. So I'll wrap it up there for now.
Great, thanks, Zoltan. Next we have Rod Lieber down the end, Strategic Account Executive, Lead on Cleantech for EDC. For those who don't know, EDC is Canada's export credit agency, offering innovative commercial solutions to help Canadian exporters and investors expand their international business. Rod joined the EDC in 1999 and has since served in a number of roles related to EDC's business in emerging markets and environmental industries. He's worked as a senior political risk analyst for South America, an Ottawa-based regional manager for Russia and the CIS countries, chief representative for Russia and the CIS from Moscow until 2010, August of 2010, when he returned to Canada to join EDC's infrastructure and environmental group with responsibility for leading EDC's Cleantech strategy. So, Rod, my question to you is, EDC is Canada's export credit agency and essentially functions as an insurance company and a bank. Can you tell us what your sweet spot is for the Cleantech sector?
Yeah, so I thought I'd situate Cleantech a little bit at EDC, and in your introduction you mentioned that we're Canada's export credit agency. We do a mix of financing and insurance, and we essentially function as a bank, but the main way in which we're differentiated from a commercial bank is not really how we operate in terms of our interaction with borrowers, but more in what motivates the types of deals that we do. So all of the deals that EDC does, everything always has a tie back to Canada for obvious reasons. We're owned by the government of Canada. In the Cleantech sector, what we've really done, and Zoltan started talking about this, is understand where would be the best place for EDC to operate and essentially fill some gaps in the market. So philosophically, we don't want to displace the commercial market, but we want to supplement it and address gaps in the market. So I mentioned that we're both an insurance company, a bank, so we lend, we insure. We also have an equity window, so we're investing directly in companies, and we have a big funds group as well. It's actually not big, but it has a number of investments, including in Asia, actually. So when we thought about where, and to your question on what our sweet spot is, and we thought about where are the areas that we should become more active, one of the areas clearly that was a gap in the market was clean tech companies, like many tech companies, but especially in clean tech, once they have been through product demonstration and they're in early commercialization, accessing debt capital and transitioning from a more pure reliance on equity capital to be able to debt finance their projects, to raise working capital to be able to cash flow large contracts that they sign, or they need to do any number of things, including posting a performance instrument for a contract agreed to. These things are not, I would say, well served by the commercial banking market. And the reason for that, as probably most people in the room already know, is that there is residual technology risk a lot of the time in these, at least perceived residual technology risk. In other words, it's not seen to be proven by the market, even though a lot of these technologies clearly have been shown to work. It's not at that point of being seen as proven by banks. So because we can operate both as a bank and as an insurance company, so we can actually backstop letters of guarantee, and we can fund directly into different types of lending arrangements. We took it upon ourselves to be able to deploy some of that capital around targeted companies, and so we've really built our clean tech strategy and portfolio from the ground up, starting with Canadian clean tech companies that are very much on the leading edge of the commercialization wave. We've worked very closely with SDTC and are building partnerships with others, including Mars. John will talk about Mars, to see what are those leading companies and how do they need us, and how can we really get them to on that real growth trajectory. So how do we move them from sort of a stage of relatively early stage and penetrate foreign markets through deploying our products? So it's the same products. It's a different approach to banking, I would say, for Cleantech, and we started rolling this out in 2012, and so we've had a year of doing some deals under our belt, and are now really starting to gear up and deploy capital in 2013.
Thanks, Rod. Our final panelist is Jon Dogterom. He's the Cleantech Practice Lead at the Mars Discovery District in Toronto. John leads the Cleantech practice at Mars, which is an organization connecting the worlds of science, business, and government to nurture a culture of innovation and global entrepreneurs, and more fundamentally, assisting Ontario-based cleantech companies in growing their business and raising capital. He has an extensive background in early stage and high-growth alternative energy companies. John, can you tell us a bit about the role of Mars in the area of cleantech?
Yeah, thanks very much. So Mars is a unique model. It is the world's largest innovation and convergence center. We have 1.5 million square feet in downtown Toronto. We were set up by 3 different levels of government originally. And the model behind it is we rent out space in the building and take the proceeds from that into offering programs to help accelerate the commercialization of new innovation. Within the building, a small percentage of it is used for incubating innovative young companies. The rest of it, we rent out to strategic tenants. And strategic tenants to us are all of the ingredients that you need to build a business and accelerate commercialization. So within the building, we have venture capital. We have a lot of corporations that have their innovation arm or their venture arm there. We also have law firms that will provide some pro bono services to our clients to help them out initially. So the way that we work is we have an advisory service. We link up experienced entrepreneurs with entrepreneurs that come to us, try to help them to build their teams. So we help them on the talent side. We help them with free market intelligence services. And the other thing is we provide links to capital. So we have good relationships with a lot of the venture capital firms, corporations. What we found we've started to really grow the scope of what we're doing in cleantech recently. Over the course of the last year, we put together our own cleantech fund, and now we're making some direct investments into some of the companies that we work with. Overall, we have about 130 active companies in cleantech right now, and we have about 40 that we classify as high potential. And high potential to us is high potential to create jobs and wealth within Canada. The other area that we've started to get into is more on policy. And what we've found is that when you look at water technology and energy, those ones are the ones that are top of mind. When you try to deploy those into existing systems with a lot of infrastructure, you often have regulation and innovation colliding, and it's very difficult to get traction in these markets. What we've started to do is work with our Ministry of Energy and try to make some changes to regulations within the province around electricity so that we can start to deploy energy storage, and we can also start to use data analytics to help in expanding what we can do with the smart meter base that we've installed within the province. So we've started to get into these programs all as a means of getting domestic adoption of our technology so that we can start to expand into the international market from there after gaining some experience at home. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, John. At this point, open the floor for questions. Sure, go ahead.
I have a question for you, for all three gentlemen there. Could you elaborate more? How can it benefit to the community as well as the government processes? Because there's processes and political implication. And could you also elaborate the criteria and challenges that's for an investor to embark on this venture? And is it sustainable for Asia? Because right now, clean tech technology, as you know, is pretty new concept, and many have asked, number one, is it sustainable? Is there a risk involved in this investment, and what kind of processes and political implications?
I'll take a first shot at that. In Ontario, as one of the provinces in Canada, we've been very aggressive for the last little while in advancing our clean tech efforts, especially around energy. We put into place the Green Energy Act a number of years ago, and what we were trying to do there was to get some manufacturing going in the province around clean tech. So we put in a feed-in tariff program for wind and solar, and started to really build up a manufacturing base. What we've found is that programs like that, when you look at a feed-in tariff program, you can create some very quick manufacturing jobs. Whether or not that is sustainable is another question, but you need that manufacturing to start in order to have innovation within the sector. So what we've found is now that we've done that, we have a lot more innovation going on in the industry. The step for us and what's critical in order to make it sustainable is that you nurture that innovation and you target the innovation towards the export market. And in order to do that, as I mentioned, you have to be able to adopt the innovation at home in order to prove it out and get some traction for some of the companies. But ultimately, for us, in order to make it sustainable, you have to be looking at the global trends, what's going on in the rest of the world, and how can you become an exporter of clean technology.
I think there's, your question was also around is it risky? I think there's greater risk in not doing anything. There's risk in everything. So there's risk in, as John had made reference to the Green Energy Act that was brought into legislation in Ontario, about maybe 3-4 years ago. That was politically risky for the government to do. Because they went out there and they made these set fairly audacious targets around renewable penetration on the grid through a renewable portfolio standard, a feed-in tariff program, which is one of the richest in the world. But what it did was it kick-started a whole industry in Ontario. So that was risky for the government to do. And then, there's risk for investors to invest in these companies. It's all inherently risky, but when you look at, if we're not going to do anything, we had fundamental problems. I'm just going to stick with the Ontario context for now because I think it helps illustrate the point. But if you're looking at kind of the energy space in Ontario, the grid and the energy system is antiquated in terms of the transmission and distribution infrastructure. The model is heavily centralized generation, very long distance transmission and distribution, and there were already infrastructure related issues in the energy system. The government also came out, the Ontario government came out and said, we're also taking offline, this was probably a couple of years, or maybe a few years before the Green Energy Act, said we're taking offline our coal power generation. That represents a big gap in our generation mix to take that offline. So that was risky for the government to do. But in the backdrop of taking coal generation offline, doing the Green Energy Act, establishing renewable integration targets, putting in place a feed-in tariff program, that really fired up the industry and honestly put Ontario on the map globally and created one of the best local market, one of the best markets for promising clean technology companies as well as large corporates to participate in. Samsung won a very big contract with the province of Ontario around, and it included some of the manufacturing component that John had spoken about. That did not sit well with a lot of the other parties in government, and it created a lot of challenges in terms of press. We've also had, sometimes you'll see the same thing in the U.S. A123, Beacon Power, Solyndra. The government has made bets on certain companies, and some of them have not turned out well. Overall, though, when we kind of take a step back and look at what has happened both in Ontario, because largely through the work that Mars has done and some of the other key stakeholders, we still have now all the key building blocks to now deliver technologies globally, which I think is a point that John poignantly made. If we didn't do anything, we would be a technology taker. So where would our manufacturing jobs be? Where would our high-value jobs be in the future? Now we actually have the right foundation upon which to be able to deliver solutions globally. And some of those solutions are related to energy storage. Both SDTC has made significant investments in a number of Ontario-based energy storage companies. Mars has worked very closely with largely the same client list around some of those energy storage companies. And these are some of the best-in-class, most globally advanced energy storage technologies, and they're being demonstrated at a very large scale in Ontario, and it creates a nice opportunity for global export from there.
So may I just add a little bit? And if you talk about risk and policy design and policy, I think, goals, one of the things that we understood, because we're very much on the later stage, in other words, we saw our sweet spot as is not really on the front end investment, but the risk that we saw, and actually that SDTC also sees, is that you invest in a number of companies and provide that more than seed capital, but you grow companies through a certain phase, but then they run up against a capital wall as they start to scale up. And the risk then is companies that really don't deserve to fail do, because they can't access bank finance and similar lower costs, capital at a lower cost to be able to build their projects and replicate them outside of the domestic market and so on. So that's a challenge. I think it's something to think about if one is embarking upon how do we design a clean tech policy that works, that ultimately results in companies growing beyond that early commercialization stage.
How confident are you moving forward ahead with this proposal and for investors to invest in clean technology? And moving forward, what's the game-changing events you will see over the next 12 months between Canada and Asia?
I'll probably take a stab at the first part of the question. Maybe you can think about the second part of the question while I'm answering the first part. I think there are immutable kind of macro trends, mega trends that just make clean tech, despite clean tech having hit kind of a bumpy patch in terms of the capital markets, the public capital markets, the past few years have been quite bad for clean tech. So the appetite for capital raises on public markets have not been good. A number of the big companies, kind of the promising clean tech companies who have IPO'd have been hammered pretty heavily. There's been quite a bit of pullback from the public capital markets. And more recently, in 2012, there's been a pullback in the private equity markets of venture capital, primarily venture capital investment into clean tech. And what we're seeing is a little bit of consolidation and the industry kind of taking a step back and trying to figure out where they're going to place their bets in the future. There are some challenges around the investment models that have been borrowed from IT investing and taken and applied directly to clean tech investing. And there's different challenges. One is clean tech is a very heterogeneous definition. So there's really capital light opportunities within clean tech, and there's a lot of capital heavy asset intensive type of solutions in clean tech. The more capital heavy side of the equation takes a long time to develop these technologies. It takes a lot of capital to develop these technologies. So often you have to build a pilot plant. It can cost millions of dollars to build a pilot plant in order to really understand whether or not it's going to work. You know, if you're going to build an app, you can do that pretty quickly, relatively low cost. So your design iterations and your prove-out cycles are much, much quicker. Another point which John made, and I love I love the words. It's where innovation and regulation collide, and it really is. You know, you can innovate quickly in IT, and you can possibly deploy a new IT system within an enterprise. And you can run into some hiccups and some hurdles, but that's very different than developing a fundamentally different technology that needs to be integrated into the energy system, and the infrastructure looks largely the same now as it did 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, and all of our regulatory structure is built around that system not changing. So that's where you got this innovation and regulation colliding. You know, that is a challenge, but the fundamental mega trends are still there. Urbanization, industrialization, people moving from, well, I guess that's urbanization, from rural areas to cities. We've got climate change, we've got water stresses, we've got finite resources. These are things that we're running up against a wall in a matter of ways, in multiple dimensions. And the only way to be able to continue to enjoy a high standard of living is to innovate and innovate quickly and find ways to knock down these regulations.
One thing that I wanted to touch on, you know, you were asking about relationship between Asia and Canada and some of the game-changing things. Well, one thing that I would really recommend is I've been hearing a lot about smart meter pilots and deployments here in the region now, and I would encourage you to reach out to us and find out more about our experience with it. Using smart meters as an example, we rolled out 4.6 million smart meters in Ontario a number of years ago, and now we're doing time of day pricing, but now we're also starting to get into some more innovation around smart meters and figuring out what else can be done with them. And the real opportunity, I think, for utilities here is to learn from what we did in Ontario as an example there, and reach out to us, because there are things that we would do differently if we were to do it again now. And the great thing is that starting from the point that you might be at with looking at early pilots on smart meters, I think you could leapfrog and gain a lot by talking to us and some of our utilities.
As an investor, you know, we're obviously intrigued by Canadian companies, and we see them creating a lot of value in this part of the world. But if we were to focus on a couple of subsectors within the broad clean tech space, particularly in Southeast Asia, where do you think our capital allocations to such companies could be most impacted, and what sectors and regions should that be deployed here in Southeast Asia?
This is something we're trying to figure out, which is a large reason why we're also down here. One of the points that I try to make in my presentation yesterday is we almost have this kind of supply-demand paradox, where we have no shortage of supply of, you know, promising clean technologies, new ideas, new innovations. There's a lot of stuff that's available for the pickings. When you look at kind of what the number of companies that have matured to the point at which they've retired most of the technology risk, they have a reference customer or a reasonable pilot scale and some operating history, you know, that number comes down, but there's still a lot that's out there. And a lot of that has been developed in both in Western markets and in developed market economies and developing and emerging market economies. The challenge now is, you know, if I'm looking at kind of the Canada to emerging markets lens, how do we get our technologies into emerging markets? Emerging markets, you know, everybody knows we've got to be in China, we've got to be in India, you know, we've got to be in Southeast Asia. These are the fast-growing markets. They're huge. They dwarf the local market opportunities in more developed economies, and the rate of change is much faster. So the ability to absorb, ideally, theoretically, the ability to absorb these technologies will be greater. But the markets are opaque for, you know, a small early-stage company which may not have a high degree of sophistication or in-market expertise. They don't understand how to navigate around the market structure, the regulatory structure, culturally, how to do business. So I think finding like a local partner is critical. I think there's also the reciprocal opportunity where you know, we do not have all of the technology solutions that we need. That's developing as much in Asia and other parts of the world as it is in developed market economies. There's opportunities for technologies to come into Canada and the US. John has spoken about some of the clean energy opportunities in Ontario. There's lots of other attractive market opportunities in North America where some of these companies can plug in. But ideally, if we can get visibility into who some of the key market players are within the Asian marketplace and understand how some of our companies connect into those, that would be ideal. And if capital can then even invest in joint ventures, where then they undertake the commercialization and perhaps the adaptation, the customization of that technology for local market needs, and you and, you know, other investors are able to invest in those joint ventures and bring that local market expertise. I think that's some of the winning formula, but we're still trying to figure that out. And, you know, EDC being very active within a number of global regions, I'd be curious your perspectives on this, Ron.
Well, I think you're also interested in, on a sector basis where there's a concentration of almost a cluster, on a cluster. And I mean, I don't think that we would add that much more than what you would probably, you know, you'd probably know more than we would about where the real concentration and needs are of Southeast Asia. But I think it's fairly well known that I could probably say this, that Canada has a cluster in the water sector. So water treatment, there's a good correlation there. Biomass, waste energy technologies. We have, and when we look at the ones that are commercialized and deployable, those are the ones that pop out at me. So I think that's where we would start. And really the challenge is getting them. They've been demonstrated in, whether it's North America or Europe, they need to be demonstrated here. And that's what we need to finance, those types of projects.
And I would add also that the Trade Commissioner Service can also play a role in helping identify opportunities and partnerships back and forth, so we can help potential investors link up with organizations like these and others, and we're happy to have that discussion with you. I'm mindful of the time, so if there are no other questions that I can see, I'd like to thank our three speakers and everybody here in the audience today. I encourage you all to continue this conversation. We have a Canada meeting lounge just next door, so I encourage you to take advantage of that. We also, as I mentioned, the Trade Commissioner Service here at the High Commission, we have a dedicated clean tech and water sector officer. Her name is Anne Rouleau. She's just over there, so I encourage you to contact Anne, and she can work with you to make those linkages that we just talked about. And we look forward to doing business with you. Thanks very much for coming. Appreciate it.